Stop this wicked talk. My son is no thief. He is the rightful heir to this throne. A prince who steals from his own people. The whole kingdom is watching. A thief can never wear the crown. You twist the truth. You have filled this palace with lies and poison. The proof is everywhere. Gold disappears, jewels vanish, shame follows him like a shadow. Lies. The truth will prevail. Even if the world turns against him, I know my son. He is innocent. Innocent? Then why does the throne tremble at his name? A thief cannot sit where kings have sat.
The kingdom of Eziama was rich and beautiful. It stood on wide land that stretched beyond the eye could see. Tall trees surrounded the borders of the kingdom like strong guards. The morning sun rose gently over the hills, shining its golden light on farms, rivers, and houses built with care. The air was fresh and clean. Birds sang from the treetops. Children laughed in open fields. Everywhere one looked, there was peace. The farms of Eziama were green all year round. Farmers woke up before sunrise to tend to their crops. They planted yam, maize, vegetables, and many other good things. Their hands were strong from work, and their hearts were happy because the soil of Eziama was kind to them. Rain fell when it was needed. The sun shone when it was time. The harvest never failed. The rivers of the kingdom were full and clear. Women gathered at the river banks early in the morning to fetch water in clay pots. Fishermen cast their nets and returned home with plenty of fish. The river flowed calmly, reflecting the sky like a shining mirror. It gave life to the land and joy to the people. The people of Eziama were hardworking and content. Traders filled the market square every week. Colorful fabrics, fresh food, carved tools, and shining beads decorated their stalls. There was no fear in the hearts of the people, for they trusted their king. King Uzo ruled the land with wisdom and strength. He was a tall man with a calm face and steady eyes. When he walked through the village, people bowed respectfully. He listened carefully when elders spoke. He judged matters fairly. He did not favor the rich over the poor. He did not ignore the cry of the weak. Because of this, the people loved him deeply. When disputes arose between neighbors, King Uzo sat in the palace courtyard and heard both sides patiently. He never rushed his judgment. He always sought truth. When thieves were caught, he punished them justly, but without cruelty. When farmers struggled, he reduced their taxes. When young warriors needed guidance, he trained them with discipline and courage. By his side stood Queen Ezine, a calm and respected woman. She was known for her gentle voice and wise heart. She carried herself with quiet dignity. She dressed in fine traditional garments and wore beads that showed her royal position, but she never allowed pride to enter her heart. Queen Ezine cared deeply for the women of the kingdom. She visited mothers who had just given birth. She comforted widows. She helped settle disagreements among women in the market. She taught young girls how to behave with respect and strength. Because of her kindness, the palace doors were never closed to those who needed help. The palace itself stood proudly in the center of the kingdom. It was built with strong walls and wide courtyards. Guards stood at the gates, alert and loyal. Inside, there were large halls where the king held meetings with chiefs and elders. There were quiet gardens where the queen often walked in the evenings. King Uzo and Queen Ezine had 2 children who brought great joy to the palace. Their first child was Prince Daik. From a young age, he showed signs of strength and leadership. He was not lazy. He woke early each morning before the sun fully rose. Under the guidance of palace warriors, he trained daily. He learned how to hold a sword properly. He practiced archery with steady focus. He ran long distances to build endurance. Sweat often covered his body, but he never complained. Prince Daik respected his teachers and listened carefully to advice. When he made mistakes during training, he corrected himself quickly. He treated palace guards kindly and spoke politely to servants. Even as a young boy, he carried himself like someone preparing for great responsibility. He also studied the laws of the kingdom. Elders taught him the history of Eziama. They told him stories of past kings who ruled with honor and courage. He listened closely, asking questions and seeking understanding. He knew one day he would carry the crown, and he did not take that lightly. Their second child was Princess Akoma. She was gentle and thoughtful. While her brother trained with swords and bows, she learned wisdom and compassion. She spent time with her mother, observing how the queen settled matters peacefully. She learned how to speak softly yet firmly. She learned how to comfort others with kind words. Princess Akuoma loved reading ancient scrolls and listening to the elders speak of tradition. She often sat in the palace garden, watching birds and thinking deeply. She cared about the people of the kingdom. When she saw a hungry child, she would ask the palace servant to provide food. When she heard of sickness, she would visit quietly and offer comfort. The palace was full of laughter because of these two children. In the evenings, Prince Daik and Princess Akuoma would sit with their parents in the courtyard. They would listen to musicians play soft drums and stringed instruments. Sometimes the king would tell stories of his youth. Sometimes the queen would share lessons about patience and honor. There was unity within the royal family. There was no fear or jealousy, only peace. The chiefs and elders of Eziama often gathered in the palace hall to discuss matters of the kingdom. They praised the king openly. They admired the prince's discipline. They respected the princess's wisdom. They believed the future of Eziama was secure. Travelers from neighboring lands spoke highly of Eziama. They said it was a land of justice and prosperity. They said the roads were safe. They said the markets were full. They said the king was fair. Under King Uzo's rule, crime was low. No one dared disturb the peace because the king's authority was firm. Warriors trained regularly, not because war was near, but because strength must always be prepared. The seasons passed smoothly. The rains came at the right time. The crops grew tall and strong. Farmers sang while working. Children played freely in open spaces. The elderly sat under large trees telling stories of old times. One year, the harvest was greater than ever before. The barns were full. The yam barns overflowed. The fishermen returned with heavy nets. The traders smiled as their goods sold quickly. The chiefs approached the king with joy and suggested that a great harvest festival should be held. King Ubozo agreed gladly. He believed the people deserved to celebrate their hard work and blessings. Preparations began at once. The palace courtyard was decorated with fresh palm leaves and bright fabrics. Drummers practiced day and night. Dancers prepared colorful costumes. Women pounded yam and prepared soups in large pots. The air was filled with excitement. On the day of the festival, the entire kingdom gathered. The sun shone brightly. The market square was filled with people wearing their finest clothes. Children ran happily from one corner to another. The sound of drums echoed across the land. King Ubozo and Queen Ezine sat proudly on their royal seats. Prince Dike stood tall beside his father. Princess Akuoma stood gracefully beside her mother. The people cheered loudly when they saw the royal family. Dancers moved in rhythm to the drums. Warriors displayed their strength. Farmers presented baskets of fresh crops as a sign of gratitude. The king smiled as he looked at his people, proud of what they had built together. Food was shared freely. Laughter filled the air. Elders blessed the land. The festival continued until the sun began to set slowly behind the hills. That night, as torches lit up the palace courtyard, King Ubozo stood before his people and thanked them for their loyalty and hard work. The people cheered again, raising their hands in joy. The kingdom of Eziama stood strong, united and peaceful under the wise rule of King Ubozo, and the great harvest festival was celebrated with happiness throughout the land. In the kingdom of Eziama, tradition was not something people ignored. It was the foundation of their lives. The elders guarded it. The chiefs respected it. The people obeyed it. Every king before King Uzo had followed the ancient customs without question, and one of the strongest customs was this: a king must marry more than one wife. The elders believed that a king with more than one wife strengthened the royal bloodline. They believed it protected the throne from danger. If anything happened to one wife or her children, the royal line would still continue. To them, it was not simply about love. It was about security, growth, and honor. For many years, King Uzo had not spoken about this tradition. He had been fully content with Queen Ezine. She had given him 2 healthy children. She stood beside him faithfully. She was wise and calm. The kingdom was peaceful. There was no trouble. In his heart, he felt complete. But as time passed, whispers began to rise among some elders. One evening, after a meeting in the palace courtyard, a few respected chiefs remained behind. Their faces were serious. They bowed respectfully before the king. "Your Majesty," one elder began gently, "we speak not to trouble your heart, but to protect the throne." King Uzo looked at them carefully. "Speak freely," he said calmly. The eldest among them cleared his throat. "It is our tradition that a king must marry more than one wife. It has always been so. It ensures strength and unity in the royal house." The king did not answer immediately. He already knew what they were saying. He had expected this day would come. "We mean no disrespect to the queen," another elder added quickly. "She is honorable and wise, but the law of our fathers must be kept." The king nodded slowly. "I understand." That night, after the elders left, King Uzo walked alone in the palace garden. The moon shone brightly above him. The air was cool and quiet. He thought deeply about his duty. He loved Queen Ezine with sincerity. She had stood by him through difficult times. She had shared his burdens. She had raised their children with care. He did not wish to cause her pain. Yet he was not only a husband, he was a king. The weight of the crown rested heavily on his thoughts. The next evening, he called Queen Ezine to sit with him privately in their chamber. A soft lamp burned beside them. The room was quiet. She sensed that something serious was on his mind. "My lord," she said gently, "your face carries heavy thoughts." King Uzo sighed slowly. "You know our traditions," he began carefully. "The elders have spoken to me." Queen Ezine did not interrupt. She listened calmly. "They believe it is time for me to take another wife," he continued. "They say it is necessary for the security of the throne." There was silence in the room for several moments. Queen Ezine lowered her eyes slightly. She had known this conversation might come one day, but hearing it aloud still touched her heart. She loved her husband deeply. She cherished the peace of their family. The thought of sharing him was not easy. But she was not only a wife, she was a queen. She understood that the throne demanded sacrifice. After a long pause, she lifted her eyes and looked at him steadily. "My lord," she said softly, "we are not ordinary people. Our lives belong to the kingdom. If tradition requires this, then we must honor it." The king searched her face carefully. "Does this not pain you?" he asked honestly. She gave a small, gentle smile. "It does," she admitted, "but I will not allow personal feelings to weaken the throne. Our children must inherit a united kingdom. If this is what protects that future, then I will accept it." King Uzo felt both gratitude and sadness at her strength. He reached for her hand. "You are truly a queen," he said quietly. Queen Ezine did not show jealousy. She did not raise her voice. She did not allow bitterness to grow in her heart. Instead, she showed maturity and wisdom. She chose duty over personal comfort. The next morning, word spread quietly among the chiefs that the king had accepted the tradition. The palace servants began to whisper among themselves. The elders felt relieved. They believed stability was being preserved. Prince Daik and Princess Akoma were too young to fully understand the meaning of what was happening, but they noticed a change in the atmosphere. The palace seemed quieter than usual. Queen Ezine continued her duties without complaint. She visited the market. She spoke kindly to the women. She oversaw palace activities as always. No one saw tears in her eyes. No one heard anger in her voice. King Uzo admired her even more for her strength. Soon, the process of searching for a second wife began. The chiefs gathered families from noble households across nearby lands. They sought a young woman of good character, respectful upbringing, and strong health. It was important that she would honor the palace and support the royal house. Messengers were sent to distant villages. News traveled that the king of Eziama would soon take another wife. Families began to prepare their daughters, hoping for the great honor of joining the royal household. But the king was careful. He did not rush the decision. He asked questions about each maiden. He inquired about their upbringing, their temperament, their behavior. He did not want pride or trouble within the palace. Queen Ezine also advised him privately. Choose someone gentle, she said. Choose someone who respects elders and values peace. The king nodded. He trusted her judgment. Days turned to weeks. Several young women were presented before the council for consideration. Some were beautiful but proud. Some were quiet but lacked confidence. Some were strong but impatient. The king observed them all calmly. Finally, news came of a young maiden from a neighboring village who was said to be beautiful, humble, and well-trained in tradition. Her family was honorable. Her behavior was modest. The elders were pleased. Arrangements were made for her to visit the palace under supervision. The palace was prepared to receive her properly, according to custom. Queen Ezine prepared herself as well. She reminded herself that peace must be protected. She prayed silently for strength. On a bright afternoon, the chiefs gathered once more in the palace courtyard. The air was filled with quiet expectation. The king sat on his royal seat. Queen Ezine sat beside him, composed and dignified. An elder stepped forward and cleared his throat. People of Eziama, he announced, our king has honored the tradition of our fathers. After careful search and consultation, it has been decided. The crowd leaned in attentively. A young maiden of good character and noble upbringing will soon enter the palace as the king's second wife. Murmurs spread gently among the people, not in anger, but in acceptance. This was their way. This was their law. King Uzo remained calm. Queen Ezine held her head high, her face peaceful. The announcement echoed across the courtyard. A young maiden would soon enter the palace. The day finally arrived when the young maiden chosen to become the king's second wife would enter the palace of Eziama. The morning sun rose gently over the kingdom, spreading golden light across the land. The palace courtyard had been swept clean. Fresh palm leaves were placed at the entrance gates. The chiefs and elders wore their finest traditional garments. The atmosphere was calm but full of expectation. The people of Eziama gathered at a respectful distance from the palace. They were curious but disciplined. They wanted to see the woman who would join their royal family. They did not speak loudly. They waited quietly. From the main road leading into the palace, a small procession slowly approached. At the front walked respected elders from the maiden's family. Behind them walked young women carrying gifts, baskets of fruits, fine fabrics, and jars of oil. At the center of the group walked the maiden herself. Her name was Akwaogo. She was indeed beautiful, but her beauty was not loud or proud. Her face was calm. Her eyes were lowered in respect. She wore fine traditional clothing neatly wrapped around her body. Her hair was carefully braided and decorated modestly. She did not walk with pride. She walked with humility. When the procession reached the palace gates, the guards stepped aside respectfully. Drums beat softly to announce her arrival. King Udozo and Queen Ezine sat in the courtyard, waiting with dignity. Akwaogo approached slowly. When she stood before the king and queen, she bowed deeply. She knelt respectfully before Queen Ezine first, as tradition demanded, and greeted her with soft words of respect. Queen Ezine looked at the young woman carefully. She saw no pride in her eyes. She saw nervousness, yes, but also sincerity. She saw a young woman who understood that she was entering not just a marriage, but a responsibility. Queen Ezine rose gently from her seat and stepped forward. To the surprise of many watching, she reached down and lifted Akwaogo up kindly. "Welcome to the palace of Eziama," Queen Ezine said calmly. "You are received in peace." Akwaogu bowed again, her voice steady though soft. I am grateful for your kindness. I will serve this house with respect. King Udozo observed quietly. He felt relief in his heart. The young maiden carried herself with dignity and modesty. There was no sign of arrogance. The formal rites were performed according to tradition. Gifts were exchanged between families. Blessings were spoken by elders. Prayers were offered for unity and peace in the royal household. After the ceremonies were completed, Akwaogu was led into the palace by Queen Ezine herself. This gesture did not go unnoticed. The palace servant watched closely. They understood that how the first queen behaved would set the tone for the future. Inside the palace walls, Akwaogu was shown her living chambers. They were beautifully prepared but not overly decorated. She thanked the servants politely. She spoke gently to everyone she met. She did not demand attention. She did not give commands. Prince Dike and Princess Akoma had been observing from a distance earlier in the courtyard. They had been told about their father's second marriage, though they were still young. They trusted their parents and did not question the decision. Later that afternoon, Queen Ezine brought the children to meet Akwaogu properly inside the palace. Prince Daik stood tall beside his mother. Princess Akwoma held her mother's hand gently. This is your father's wife, Queen Ezine said calmly. You must treat her with respect. Prince Daik bowed slightly. You are welcome to our home, he said respectfully. Princess Akwoma smiled warmly. I hope you will be happy here, she added softly. Akwaogu felt a small wave of emotion at their kindness. She knelt slightly to greet them properly. Thank you, she replied. I will care for you as my own. From that moment, there was no tension in the palace. There was no coldness. The children continued their daily routines. Prince Daik returned to his training sessions with palace warriors. Princess Akwoma continued learning from her mother and the elders. Akwaogu began adjusting to palace life slowly and carefully. She woke early each morning and greeted Queen Ezine respectfully. She asked questions about palace customs and traditions. She listened more than she spoke. Queen Ezine guided her patiently. She explained how the palace functions were organized. She showed her how meetings with chiefs were conducted. She taught her how to supervise servants without harshness. The palace servants began to grow comfortable around Akwaogu. She did not shout at them. She thanked them for their work. She learned their names. The elders watched carefully during the first weeks. They were pleased to see no signs of conflict. King Ubo felt peace in his heart. He spent time equally between both wives, but he ensured fairness in his actions. In the evenings, the royal family sometimes gathered in the courtyard. Queen Ezine and Akwaogu sat beside each other peacefully. They listened as Prince Daik spoke about his training. They smiled as Princess Akwoma shared stories of what she had learned. The people of Eziama slowly accepted the new queen fully. In the market square, women spoke kindly of her modest behavior. They admired how she showed respect to Queen Ezine. They believed harmony would continue in the palace. Akwaogu did not try to change palace routines. She followed the ways already established. When guests visited, she greeted them politely. When festivals were organized, she stood beside Queen Ezine with grace. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no jealousy. Prince Daik remained focused on becoming a strong leader. Princess Akwoma grew even closer to her mother. Sometimes, she also sat with Akwaogu to learn small domestic skills. Akwaogu treated her kindly and patiently. King Ubo felt satisfied that he had made the right choice. The palace was united. The tradition had been fulfilled without destroying peace. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the tall trees of Eziama, Queen Ezine and Akwaogu walked together in the palace garden. The air was cool. Birds were returning to their nests. You are adjusting well, Queen Ezine said calmly. Akwaogu nodded respectfully. It is because you have shown me kindness, she replied. Queen Ezine looked at her gently. Peace in this house must be protected at all times. If we stand united, the kingdom will remain strong. Akwaogu bowed her head. I understand. The palace guards stood alert at the gates. The servants carried out their duties smoothly. The children laughed in the courtyard as they played simple games. There was balance within the royal home. As night fell, lamps were lit inside the palace. Soft music drifted through the air. King Ubo sat with both queens in calm conversation. There was no sign of rivalry, only dignity and order. Akwagu lay in her chamber later that night, reflecting on her new life. She understood the honor placed upon her shoulders. She knew she must protect the peace she had found. Outside, the kingdom of Eziama slept peacefully under the watchful stars, and within the palace walls, Akwagu settled peacefully into palace life. Time passed gently in the palace of Eziama. The seasons changed, and peace continued to live within the royal household. Akwagu adjusted more and more to her new life. She followed the customs of the palace carefully. She respected Queen Ezine openly and sincerely. The people of Eziama had no reason to doubt her loyalty. Not long after her arrival, news began to spread quietly within the palace walls. Akwagu was expecting a child. When the palace midwives confirmed it, word was delivered carefully to King Uzo. The king closed his eyes for a moment and gave thanks. A child was always a blessing, especially in a royal household. It meant strength for the throne and continuation of the bloodline. Queen Ezine received the news calmly. Though she felt the natural weight of sharing motherhood within the palace, she did not allow jealousy to grow in her heart. She understood that children brought unity, not division, if raised in peace. She visited Akwagu that evening. "You must take care of yourself," Queen Ezine said gently. "Rest when you are tired. Eat well. The palace healers will attend to you." Akwagu bowed slightly from where she sat. "Thank you for your kindness," she replied. From that day, the palace became even more careful. The servants moved gently around Akwagu. The palace healer prepared herbs and nourishing meals. The elders offered prayers for safe delivery. Prince Pike and Princess Akuoma were told they would soon have a younger sibling. Princess Akuoma smiled with excitement. Prince Dike nodded seriously. "I will teach him to be strong," Prince Dike said confidently. Months passed slowly. Akwaogo's condition became more visible. The king visited her often, offering support and calm words. Queen Ezine also checked on her regularly, ensuring that nothing lacked. The people of Eziama heard the news and prayed for a safe birth. A royal child meant celebration for the entire kingdom. Then, one quiet night, when the moon was high and bright, Akwaogo went into labor. The palace midwives were called quickly. Lamps were lit. The palace corridors grew tense with expectation. King Uzo waited outside the chamber, pacing slowly. His face was serious. Though he was a strong ruler, he was also a father, and concern filled his heart. Queen Ezine sat not far from him, calm but alert. She offered silent prayers. Inside the chamber, the midwives worked carefully. Hours passed. The night grew deeper. Then, at last, the sound of a newborn baby's cry filled the air. The palace seemed to breathe again. A healthy baby boy had been born. The midwife stepped out with a smile and bowed before the king. "Your Majesty, it is a son." King Uzo felt joy rise within him. He gave thanks loudly. Queen Ezine smiled with genuine warmth. The baby was cleaned and wrapped carefully. When the king was finally allowed to enter the chamber, he looked down at his son with pride. His tiny fingers moved gently. His cry was strong. Akwaogo lay tired but smiling. She held her son close. Soon, Queen Ezine entered quietly. She looked at the baby with calm eyes. "He is strong," she said softly. The next morning, the announcement was made throughout Eziama. The king had been blessed with another son. Drums began to beat across the kingdom. The people rejoiced. Women danced in the market square. Men clapped and praised the royal house. Children ran excitedly through the streets. The palace courtyard was decorated again. Gifts poured in from chiefs and neighboring villages. Goats, yams, fine cloth, and baskets of fruit were brought as tokens of honor. The child was given the name Echezona. On the day of his naming ceremony, the entire palace gathered. Elders blessed the child. Prayers were offered for strength, wisdom, and good character. Prince Daik stood beside his father, looking at his baby brother carefully. He had never seen someone so small and delicate. When he was allowed to hold the baby under supervision, he did so with surprising gentleness. He looked down at Echezona with serious eyes. "I will protect him always," Prince Daik said firmly. The elder smiled at his words. Princess Akwama leaned closer to see the baby's tiny face. "He is beautiful," she whispered. From that day, Prince Daik took his role as elder brother seriously. Whenever the baby cried, he would ask what was wrong. When Echezona began to crawl months later, Prince Daik watched carefully to ensure that he did not fall or hurt himself. Akwa Ogo noticed this and felt gratitude. She saw that Prince Daik held no jealousy. He did not see the baby as competition. He saw him as family. Queen Ezine also encouraged unity. "You are brothers," she would remind Prince Daik gently. "Strength grows when there is unity." As Echezona grew from a baby into a toddler, his laughter filled the palace. He had bright eyes and a cheerful spirit. He reached for Prince Daik whenever he saw him. He followed Princess Akwama closely as she walked. The palace servants often smiled at the sight of the three children together. King Uzo felt proud watching his sons. He often lifted Echezona high into the air, making him laugh loudly. He trained Prince Daik with discipline, but he softened his voice when speaking to the younger child. Queen Ezine and Akwa Ogo walked side by side in raising the children. There was no open disagreement. They shared responsibilities carefully. They attended ceremonies together. They greeted visitors together. The people of Eziama admired the harmony within the palace. They spoke of how peaceful the royal home remained even after the birth of another prince. Years passed gently. Echezona learned to walk, then to run. He stumbled often, but Prince Daik was always close behind him. Princess Akoma often held his hand when they walked in the palace garden. When Prince Daik practiced sword movements in the courtyard, little Echezona would sit and watch with wide eyes. Sometimes he would pick up a small wooden stick and copy his brother's movements clumsily. The palace filled with laughter at such moments. At mealtimes, the children sat together. Prince Daik sometimes shared pieces of fruit with his younger brother. Princess Akoma wiped Echezona's face when he made a mess. The bond between them grew naturally. On warm evenings, the three children played simple games in the palace courtyard. They chased each other around pillars. They hid behind trees. They laughed freely without fear. Akwa Ogo would watch from her chamber window, smiling softly. Queen Ezine sometimes joined her, observing the children together. "Our children must remain united," Queen Ezine would say quietly. Akwa Ogo would nod in agreement. The kingdom of Eziama remained strong and peaceful. The birth of Prince Echezona had only added to the joy of the royal house. The people continued their farming, trading, and celebrations. The palace remained a place of order and unity. And as the sun set on many peaceful days, the sight of Prince Daik, Princess Akoma, and little Prince Echezona running and laughing together became a symbol of hope for the future of Eziama. The three children played together happily in the palace courtyard, their laughter echoing through the walls as harmony continued to reign within the royal home. Years moved slowly but steadily in the kingdom of Eziama. The children who once ran freely in the palace courtyard began to grow taller and stronger. Their laughter became deeper. Their steps became firmer. The palace that once echoed with the playful cries of childhood now carried the confident voices of young adults preparing for greater responsibilities. Prince Daik was no longer a small boy holding a wooden stick. He had grown into a strong and disciplined young man. His shoulders were broad. His eyes were sharp and focused. Every morning, before the sun rose fully above the hills, he was already awake. He trained harder than before. His sword movements were swift and controlled. His aim with the bow was steady. He practiced riding horses with balance and confidence. The palace warriors respected him. They no longer saw him only as a prince, they saw him as a future leader. When he made mistakes during training, he corrected himself quickly, without complaint. When he fell during practice, he rose again without anger. Discipline had become part of him. But Prince Daik was not only strong in body, he also grew strong in character. He attended council meetings beside his father and listened carefully as chiefs discussed matters of land, trade, and justice. He learned how to speak clearly and wisely. When the king asked for his opinion, he answered calmly and respectfully. The elders noticed his maturity. "He listens before he speaks," one elder whispered during a council gathering. "He does not rush to judgment," another added. Princess Akuoma also grew into a graceful young woman. Her beauty was gentle and dignified. She walked with calm confidence. Her voice carried softness but also strength. She had learned deeply from her mother, Queen Ezine. She understood the ways of the palace. She knew how to comfort others and how to correct gently when needed. Women in the kingdom often sought her advice. Young girls admired her. She helped settle small disputes among market women. She visited families during times of celebration and sorrow. Her wisdom grew quietly, like a tree spreading its branches without noise. She often spoke privately with Prince Daik, reminding him to balance strength with mercy. "A king must be firm," she once told him, "but he must also understand the hearts of his people." Prince Daik respected her words. Prince Echezona also grew steadily. He was younger than his siblings, but he developed into a cheerful and kind young man. His smile was easy. His laughter came freely. He enjoyed spending time with both his brother and sister. Though he trained with the palace warriors like Prince Daik, his nature was softer. He showed compassion easily. When a servant dropped something by mistake and feared punishment, Echezona would speak gently on their behalf. When children from the village visited the palace, he played with them without pride. The people of Eziama saw the differences between the brothers, but they admired both. Prince Daik carried strength and discipline. Prince Echezona carried warmth and kindness. King Uzo watched his children carefully as they matured. Pride filled his heart when he saw Prince Daik's dedication. Satisfaction filled him when he heard Princess Akuoma's wise counsel. Joy warmed him when he observed Echezona's cheerful spirit. The kingdom itself continued to flourish. The farms produced abundant harvests year after year. Trade with neighboring lands increased. The market square remained lively and safe. Under King Uzo's steady rule, peace had never been broken. But as Prince Daik grew older, the people began to speak more openly about the future. In the marketplace, elders discussed what kind of king he would become. "He is strong like his father," some would say. "He listens to advice," others replied. "He will protect the land well." Whenever Prince Daik walked through the village, people greeted him respectfully. Some bowed slightly, others praised him openly. "Our future king," they would call him. Prince Daik remained humble when he heard such words. He did not boast, he did not smile proudly. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and continued walking. At council gatherings, elders sometimes praised him directly before the king. "Your Majesty," one elder said during a meeting, "your son shows great promise. The throne will be secure in his hands. King Uzon nodded calmly, but inside he felt deep satisfaction. Queen Ezinne listened quietly to these praises. Her heart felt both pride and responsibility. She reminded Prince Daik often that admiration must never lead to pride. Respect is earned daily, she told him. Never believe that it belongs to you automatically. Prince Daik listened carefully. Meanwhile, Prince Echezona observed all these things from a respectful distance. He admired his elder brother genuinely. He did not compete with him. He did not show envy. He supported him during training and stood beside him during ceremonies. But in another part of the palace, silent thoughts began to grow. Akwaogo watched everything carefully. At first, she had felt peace when her son was born. She had seen unity between the children. She had seen Prince Daik treat Echezona kindly. She had been grateful. But as years passed and Prince Daik's strength became more visible, a quiet fear began to rise within her heart. It was not loud at first. It was not sharp. It was only a small whisper in her mind. She noticed how often elders praised Prince Daik. She noticed how villagers spoke of him as the future king without hesitation. She noticed how naturally he stood beside his father during important meetings. She would sit quietly during council gatherings, her face calm, her thoughts restless. My son is also royal, she would think silently. He is also the king's blood. She did not speak these thoughts aloud. She did not show bitterness. She continued to behave respectfully before Queen Ezinne. She smiled when Prince Daik greeted her. She encouraged Echezona to train and learn. But the small whisper of fear slowly grew stronger. One afternoon, a special gathering was held in the palace courtyard. Chiefs and elders from nearby villages had come to discuss trade agreements and border security. Prince Daik was invited to sit among them. He listened attentively as older men spoke. When asked to share his opinion on a matter concerning river trade, he stood calmly and gave a thoughtful answer. He spoke clearly and respectfully. His words carried logic and fairness. When he finished speaking, the elders nodded in approval. Well said, one chief declared openly. The prince speaks with wisdom beyond his years, another added. The crowd murmured in agreement. Akwaogo sat slightly behind the main gathering, observing quietly. Her face remained composed. No one would have guessed what she felt inside. Her eyes moved from the elders to Prince Daik. She saw admiration in their faces. She saw approval in the king's expression. She heard the word future king spoken more than once. A tight feeling began to grow in her chest. That evening, when the gathering ended, several elders approached King Ozogi privately. Your Majesty, one said respectfully, your son is ready. The kingdom will be safe in his hands. Akwaogo stood nearby, listening carefully. She forced a small smile. Later, as she walked slowly through the palace corridors alone, her thoughts grew heavier. If Prince Daik becomes king, she whispered softly to herself, what will become of my son? She remembered the law of succession. The first son of the first queen traditionally inherited the throne. That had always been the way. She stopped near a pillar in the courtyard, watching from a distance. In the open space ahead, Prince Daik stood among a group of elders. They laughed gently as one elder placed a hand on his shoulder in approval. Princess Akuomo stood nearby, smiling calmly. Prince Echezona also stood there, listening respectfully. The evening sun cast golden light over them. Akwaogo remained still. She watched as the elders continued to praise Prince Daik openly, speaking of his strength, discipline, and wisdom. Her face showed calmness, but deep within her heart, silent fear had begun to root as she watched Prince Daik being praised by elders. The days in the palace of Eziama continued as they always had. The sun rose, the drums sounded at the right time, the council gathered, the people worked. Nothing on the outside seemed to have changed, but inside the heart of Akwaugo, something quiet and dangerous had begun to grow. At first, it was only fear. Each time she heard the elders praise Prince Dike, her heart tightened. Each time the people called him our future king, she felt something uncomfortable rise inside her. She tried to push the feeling away. She reminded herself that Prince Dike had always treated her son kindly. She remembered how he once promised to protect Echezona. She told herself that unity was better than division. But fear, when it is not controlled, slowly changes its shape. It began to whisper new thoughts into her mind. What will happen when Prince Dike becomes king? Will your son always stand behind him? Will Echezona live his whole life in his brother's shadow? These thoughts did not come from nowhere. They were fed by the voice of someone close to her. Akwaugo had a friend named Nkelma. Nkelma was a woman who often visited the palace under the excuse of friendship. She had known Akwaugo before she married the king. She spoke sweetly in public. She bowed respectfully before the queen, but her eyes were always sharp and observant. Nkelma enjoyed palace life from a distance. She liked the attention she received when she entered the royal grounds, but more than anything, she liked influence. One afternoon, while Queen Ezinne was visiting the market and the king was in council, Nkelma sat with Akwaugo in her private chamber. The room was quiet. Only the soft sound of birds outside could be heard. "You have been silent lately," Nkelma said slowly, studying her friend's face. Akwaugo forced a small smile. "There is nothing wrong." Nkelma leaned closer. "Do not hide your thoughts from me. I see how they praise the first son every day." Akwaugo's smile faded slightly. "It is tradition," she replied carefully. Nkelma shook her head slowly. "Tradition favors the strong, not the silent." Akwaugo looked at her friend in confusion. "What do you mean?" Nkelma lowered her voice. "If Prince Dike becomes king, your son will never rule, never." The words hung in the air like smoke. Akwaugo shifted uncomfortably. "Echezona is still young. There is time." Nkelma laughed softly. "Time? The elders already speak as if the crown is resting on Dike's head. Have you not seen it?" Akwaugo did not answer. She had seen it. Nkelma continued. "When he becomes king, he will have his own wife. He will have his own sons. Where will that leave Echezona?" Her chest tightened. "He loves his brother," she said quietly. "Love does not give power," Nkelma replied sharply. "Power takes its own place." The room grew heavy with silence. That evening, Akwaugo watched Prince Dike and Echezona training together in the courtyard. Dike corrected Echezona's sword movement patiently. He showed him where to place his feet. He spoke kindly. For a moment, Akwaugo's heart softened. But then, Nkelma's voice echoed again in her mind. "Your son will never rule." That night, she could not sleep easily. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of her chamber. The moonlight slipped through the window, casting long shadows across the room. She began to imagine a future where Prince Dike wore the crown. She imagined Queen Ezinne standing proudly beside him. She imagined Echezona standing behind them quietly, always second. Her breathing grew slow and heavy. The next day, Nkelma returned again. "You are thinking," Nkelma said with a knowing look. Akwaugo sighed. "I do not want trouble in this palace." Nkelma smiled faintly. "Trouble will come to you if you do nothing." Akwaugo looked at her carefully. "What are you suggesting?" Nkelma leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Sometimes destiny must be helped." Akwaugo frowned. "Helped how?" "There are ways," Nkelma said carefully. "Ways to change what people believe. Ways to remove obstacles quietly." Akwaugo stood up quickly. "No, I will not harm anyone." Nkelma raised her hand slightly. I did not say harm. I said change. Akwaogu turned away, pacing slowly. Prince Dike has done nothing wrong. Nkyoma's eyes narrowed slightly. And that is the problem. Those words sank deep. Over the following weeks, Nkyoma visited often. Each visit brought new suggestions, small seeds planted gently in conversation. People trust what they see. Reputation can be broken. The elders can change their minds. At first, Akwaogu argued against her. She reminded her that Prince Dike was noble and disciplined. She said that peace must remain in the palace. But the more she heard praise for Dike in public, the more Nkyoma's words felt sharper. One afternoon, during another council gathering, an elder stood and spoke boldly. Your Majesty, the kingdom grows stronger under your son's guidance already. The crowd nodded. Akwaogu sat quietly, her fingers tightening against her garment. Later that night, she called Echezona to sit with her. You must train harder, she said firmly. I will, mother, Echezona replied gently. You must show more strength. I try my best. She looked at him carefully. He was kind, yes. Brave, yes. But he did not hunger for power. He did not compete with his brother. He admired him. And that troubled her. When Echezona left the room, Nkyoma entered quietly. You see, Nkyoma whispered, he does not even desire the throne. Akwaogu felt frustration rise. He is young. He is loyal, Nkyoma corrected, and loyalty will keep him second forever. The fear inside Akwaogu began to change into something else. Jealousy. It was no longer only fear for her son's future. It was anger that Prince Dike seemed to shine so naturally. It was bitterness that Queen Ezine's son would carry the crown. Her thoughts began to become darker. She began to notice small things she had ignored before. When servants bowed lower to Prince Dike, when elders praised him without mentioning Echezona, when villagers spoke his name with admiration, each small moment added weight to her heart. Nkyoma saw the change clearly. You are beginning to understand, she said softly one evening. Akwaogu did not deny it. What if, Nkyoma continued carefully, the people stopped trusting him? Akwaogu looked at her sharply. How? There are forces in this world, Nkyoma said slowly, that can influence what men believe. There are powers older than tradition. Akwaogu's heart beat faster. You speak of dangerous things. Nkyoma nodded calmly. Only dangerous to those who fear them. Silence filled the chamber. Akwaogu walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard. Prince Dike was speaking with elders again. His voice was steady. The elders listened closely. Jealousy burned quietly now, no longer a small whisper, but a steady flame. What if I do nothing? Akwaogu asked softly. Then watch your son kneel forever, Nkyoma answered. The word struck deeply. Days passed, but peace no longer lived in Akwaogu's heart. She smiled in public. She greeted Queen Ezine politely. She praised Prince Dike when others did, but inside her thoughts were restless and dark. One night, when the palace had grown silent and most had gone to sleep, Nkyoma returned again. I know someone, she said quietly. Akwaogu did not ask who. He lives far from here, Nkyoma continued. He understands forces that can bend destiny. Akwaogu swallowed slowly. A healer? Nkyoma's eyes held a different meaning. More than a healer. Akwaogu closed her eyes briefly. She knew what that meant. She had heard stories of such men. Men who lived in forests. Men who dealt with powers unseen. Fear and jealousy battled inside her heart. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned slowly toward Nkyoma. Will anyone know? She asked quietly. Nkyoma shook her head. Not if we are careful. Akwaogu's heart pounded heavily. She looked once more toward the courtyard, now empty under the moonlight. She imagined the crown resting on Prince Dike's head. She imagined Echezona standing behind him. The darkness inside her grew stronger than her fear. Finally, in a quiet voice, barely above a whisper, Akwaogu spoke. "Take me to him." And in that quiet chamber, with jealousy fully rooted in her heart, Akwaogu secretly agreed to seek help. The night Akwaogu agreed to seek help, sleep did not visit her eyes. She lay awake in her chamber, staring into the darkness. The palace was quiet. The guards walked slowly along the corridors. A soft wind moved the curtains near her window. Everything seemed peaceful on the outside, but inside her heart there was a storm. Before the first light of dawn, Nkeoma arrived quietly. She wore a dark wrapper and covered her head. She did not greet anyone loudly. She moved carefully, like someone carrying a secret. "It is time," she whispered. Akwaogu hesitated for only a moment. Then she wrapped herself in a plain cloth, covering her royal garment so she would not be recognized. She did not tell the king. She did not tell Queen Ezine. She left the palace quietly through a side gate while the guards changed shifts. The two women walked quickly down a narrow path that led away from the kingdom. The morning sky was still grey. Birds had not yet begun to sing. The air felt heavy and cold. They traveled for a long time, leaving behind the farms and the familiar sound of village life. The land slowly changed. The trees grew taller and closer together. The sunlight struggled to pass through the thick branches above. Soon, they reached the dark forest. The forest was known to the people of Eziama, but it was rarely entered. It was a place of strange stories and quiet warnings. Hunters did not go too deep inside it. Children were told never to wander near it. As Akwaogu stepped into the forest, a chill moved through her body. The air felt different. The sounds of the outside world disappeared. There were no voices, no distant drums, only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional cry of an unseen animal. The trees stood tall and twisted. Their branches hung low, like arms reaching out. The ground was covered with dry leaves that cracked softly under their feet. Akwaogu slowed her steps. "Are you certain about this?" she asked in a low voice. Nkeoma did not turn back. "We have come too far to stop." They walked deeper. The forest grew darker. The path became narrow and uneven. Strange objects hung from some trees, small bundles tied with rope, bones of animals and dried leaves arranged in curtains. Akwaogo's heart beat faster. After a long walk, they finally saw a small hut standing alone between thick trees. Smoke rose slowly from a clay pot outside. The hut was built from mud and covered with dry grass. It looked old and worn, yet it stood firmly. "This is the place," Nkeoma said quietly. Akwaogo swallowed. She felt fear, but jealousy pushed her forward. They approached the hut carefully. Before they could knock, a voice came from inside. "Enter." The voice was deep and slow. Nkeoma pushed aside the hanging cloth at the entrance, and they stepped inside. The inside of the hut was dim. Only a small fire burned in the center, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Strange objects filled the room, bundles of herbs, carved wooden figures, animal skulls, and clay pots filled with unknown substances. An old man sat near the fire. His hair was long and grey. His eyes were sharp and watchful. His body was thin, but his presence felt heavy. He looked at Akwaogo without surprise. "You have come seeking something," he said calmly. Akwaogo's throat felt dry. For a moment, she could not speak. Nkeoma stepped forward. She seeks justice for her son. The old man's eyes did not move from Akwaogo. Justice, he repeated slowly, or power. Akwaogo gathered courage. I seek protection for my child's future. The old man studied her face. Protection from who? She hesitated. Then she spoke clearly. From the first son of the king. The fire crackled softly between them. The old man leaned back a little. You wish to remove him? No, Akwaogo said quickly. Not remove him, only disgrace him. The witch doctor's eyes narrowed slightly. Speak clearly. Akwaogo's voice trembled slightly, but jealousy strengthened her words. I want him to lose the respect of the people. I want them to doubt him. I want him to fall in their eyes. Silence filled the hut. The old man closed his eyes briefly, as if listening to something unseen. What do you ask specifically? He said finally. Akwaogo's heart pounded loudly in her ears. I want him to begin stealing, not by his will, but wherever he goes, something should go missing, and it should be found near him. Let him be known as a thief. Let his honor break. The fire suddenly flared slightly, as if reacting to her words. The old man opened his eyes slowly. You ask for darkness, he said calmly. Akwaogo did not answer. If the spell is cast, it cannot be undone easily, he warned. If the one you curse suffers, others may suffer with him. If darkness enters the palace, it will not choose carefully where it spreads. Akwaogo felt a small wave of doubt. For one brief moment, she remembered Prince Dike as a child, holding Echizona gently. She remembered his promise to protect his brother. But the image of him being praised by elders returned stronger. My son deserves the throne. I will not allow him to leave behind another. The old man watched her for a long moment. Very well, he said at last. He rose slowly and began gathering herbs from different corners of the hut. He crushed them together in a small clay bowl. He added ashes from the fire. He whispered words under his breath in a language Akwaogo did not understand. The air inside the hut grew heavy. The fire flickered wildly. The shadows on the walls seemed to move. The old man placed a carved wooden figure into the bowl and continued chanting. Once this is done, the first son will carry a shadow wherever he walks. His hands will attract loss. His name will attract suspicion. Akwaogo stood still, her breathing shallow. Do you still agree? He asked one final time. Yes, she answered. The old man raised the bowl toward the fire. Smoke rose thick and dark. He spoke louder words now, calling unseen forces to act. The air inside the hut seemed to shake slightly. Then, suddenly, everything became still. The fire returned to normal. The smoke cleared. It is done, the witch doctor said quietly. Akwaogo felt no lightning, no thunder, only a strange coldness inside her chest. She placed gold coins before him as payment. He did not count them. Go, he said, and remember my warning. Akwaogo turned without replying. Nkeoma followed closely. They stepped out of the hut into the forest. The trees seemed darker now. The path back felt longer. As they walked, Akwaogo remained silent. Soon, Nkeoma whispered with satisfaction, things will change. Akwaogo did not smile. When they finally reached the edge of the forest and saw the open land of Eziama again, the sun was already high. The kingdom looked peaceful from a distance. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. Farmers moved slowly across the fields. Akwaogo paused for a moment before entering the palace grounds. Her face returned to calm. Her posture straightened. No one must suspect. She stepped back through the palace gate quietly. The guards bowed respectfully, unaware of where she had been. Inside the palace, Prince Dike walked across the courtyard speaking with a palace warrior. He looked strong and confident. Akwaogo watched him briefly. Her face showed nothing, but deep within her heart, something dark and hidden now lived there as she returned to the palace with hidden evil in her heart. After Akwaogo returned from the dark forest, life in the palace continued as it always had. The sun rose, the guards stood at their posts, the servants carried out their duties, the children trained and studied. Nothing looked different on the outside. But something unseen had already begun to move. It started quietly. One afternoon, the palace prepared for a small gathering. A few respected elders had come to discuss matters of trade with King Uzo. As was tradition, refreshments were served in the royal hall. Among the items placed carefully on a decorated table was a beautiful gold cup. It was one of the palace treasures, passed down from former kings. It was used only during important meetings. The meeting went smoothly. The elders spoke. The king listened. Prince Daik sat beside his father, observing carefully as he had been trained to do. When the meeting ended, the elders left peacefully. The servants began clearing the hall. It was then that one servant froze. "The gold cup," he whispered. Another servant looked quickly at the table. The cup was gone. At first, they believed it had been moved by mistake. They searched the table again, they checked under the seats, they looked behind the curtains, but the cup was nowhere to be found. The servant in charge of royal items felt fear rise in his chest. Losing such an item was a serious matter. He reported immediately to the palace supervisor. Soon, whispers began to spread quietly through the corridors. King Uzo was informed. The king's face became serious. "Search the palace," he ordered calmly. "No one leaves until it is found." Guards began moving through the halls. Servants searched carefully in every chamber. Prince Daik, unaware of the tension growing, returned to his room after the meeting. He placed his sword carefully on its stand and removed his outer garment. He was thinking about the matters discussed during the council. There was a knock at his door. Before he could answer fully, two guards entered respectfully but firmly. "Your Highness," one said carefully, "we have been ordered to search all rooms." Prince Daik frowned slightly. "Search for what?" "A royal cup has gone missing." Prince Daik stepped aside without hesitation. "You may search." The guards moved around the room carefully. They looked behind curtains, they checked under the bed, they opened small storage boxes. Then one guard stopped suddenly. He bent down near a wooden chest beside the prince's bed. Slowly, he reached behind it. When he pulled his hand forward, the gold cup was in it. The room became silent. Prince Daik stared at the cup in disbelief. "That is impossible," he said quietly. The guards looked at one another, uncertain. They respected the prince deeply, but the evidence was in front of them. "I did not place that there," Prince Daik said firmly, his voice steady but shocked. The guard bowed slightly. "We must inform the king." Within moments, word reached the royal hall. King Uzo stood slowly when he heard. Queen Ezine's heart tightened when she saw the guards carrying the gold cup and heard where it had been found. They all gathered in the palace courtyard. Prince Daik stood before his father calmly, though confusion filled his eyes. "Is this true?" King Uzo asked quietly. "It was found in my chamber," Prince Daik replied honestly, "but I did not take it." The crowd that had gathered at a distance murmured softly. Queen Ezine stepped forward immediately. "My son will never steal," she said firmly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried strong conviction. Prince Daik stood tall. "Father, I swear before you and before our ancestors, I did not touch that cup." King Uzo studied his son carefully. He knew Daik's character. He had trained him personally. He had watched him grow. Theft did not match his son's spirit. Yet the cup had been found in his room. The king felt troubled. "Did anyone enter your chamber?" he asked honestly. "I do not know," Daik replied honestly. "I left it briefly after the meeting, but I locked it as always." The guards confirmed that there was no sign of forced entry. The elders who had remained behind whispered among themselves. "This is serious," one said quietly. "A future king must be above suspicion," another added. Queen Ezine turned sharply toward them. "You speak too quickly," she said. "One event does not define a man." Prince Echezona stood nearby, silent and worried. He looked at his elder brother with concern. "I know him," Echezona said softly. "He would not do this." Akwaogo stood slightly behind the gathering. Her face showed mild surprise, but inside, her heart was racing. The spell had begun. King Uzo raised his hand to quiet the murmurs. "This matter will be investigated carefully," he declared. "No one will accuse without proof." The gold cup was placed before him. He looked at it thoughtfully. Prince Daik felt humiliation rise inside him, but he controlled it. He refused to allow anger to take over. "I request permission to search further," he said calmly. King Uzo nodded slowly. "You may." The guards questioned servants. They examined door locks. They looked for witnesses. But nothing clear was found. No one had seen Prince Daik take the cup. No one had seen anyone enter his chamber. The mystery remained. As evening approached, the courtyard slowly emptied. The servants returned to their duties quietly. The elders left with thoughtful expressions. Inside the palace, tension lingered like a shadow. Queen Ezine entered Prince Daik's chamber privately later that night. "My son," she said gently, "tell me everything." He looked at her with honest eyes. "Mother, I did not take it. I do not understand how it appeared there." She placed her hand on his shoulder. "I believe you." Her voice was steady. "But you must be strong," she continued. "Suspicion can damage reputation if not handled carefully." Prince Daik nodded slowly. "I know." In another part of the palace, King Uzo sat alone in his chamber. The incident troubled him deeply. He trusted his son, but as king he could not ignore evidence. "If this is false," he whispered to himself, "who would dare such a thing?" The night grew quiet. The next morning, whispers began spreading among some palace servants. Though the king had not declared guilt, the story had already started moving beyond the palace walls. A small doubt had entered the air. Prince Daik stepped into the courtyard that morning with his head held high. He did not avoid anyone. He did not hide in his chamber. When a few warriors greeted him hesitantly, he responded firmly. "I have done nothing wrong," he said clearly. His confidence steadied some hearts. But inside, confusion weighed heavily on him. He searched his memory again and again. He replayed every movement from the previous day. He tried to understand how such a thing could happen. Queen Ezine stood beside him for breakfast in the royal hall. Her presence showed her support openly. King Uzo watched his son closely throughout the day. He saw no sign of guilt, only confusion and quiet pain. By evening, Prince Daik requested to speak before his father and a few trusted elders. They gathered in a smaller chamber. "I know what is being whispered," Prince Daik began calmly. "I know doubt has entered some minds." The elders listened quietly. "I cannot explain how the cup reached my chamber, but I swear upon my honor and the name of our ancestors, I did not steal it." His voice did not shake. King Uzo's eyes remained fixed on him. "I ask for time," Daik added, "time to discover the truth." The room remained silent for a moment. Queen Ezine spoke gently. "Truth always rises. Prince Daik turned toward his father and knelt respectfully. "I promise," he said firmly, "I will prove my innocence." The chamber remained heavy with uncertainty, but Prince Daik's voice carried steady determination as he promised to prove his innocence. After the incident of the gold cup, the palace of Eziama did not return fully to peace. On the surface, everything looked normal. The guards still stood at their posts. The servants still carried trays of food. The drums still sounded at the right time. But beneath the calm, a quiet tension moved like a shadow. Prince Idike continued his duties as always. He trained in the mornings. He attended council meetings beside his father. He greeted the elders respectfully. He carried himself with dignity. He refused to allow the accusation of the gold cup to change his behavior. But something else began to happen. A few days after the gold cup incident, a palace treasurer reported that a small pouch of silver coins had gone missing from his office. The room had been secure. Only trusted officials had access. The search began immediately. Once again, guards moved carefully through the palace corridors. Rooms were searched. Servants were questioned. And once again, something shocking happened. The pouch of silver coins was found inside a folded cloth in Prince Idike's training chamber. The guard who discovered it froze in disbelief. When the news reached the king, silence filled the hall. Prince Idike stood still as the pouch was placed before him. "I have never entered the treasurer's office," he said firmly. "I have no need for silver." The treasurer bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, I do not accuse you personally, but the coins were found among your belongings." Queen Ezine's face grew pale, but her voice remained steady. "This is not a coincidence. Someone is doing this deliberately." The elders began to murmur more loudly this time. Twice, one whispered. "This is troubling," another said quietly. King Uzo felt his heart grow heavy. He trusted his son deeply, but as king, he could not ignore what the eyes had seen twice. Prince Idike's chest tightened. He felt confusion mixed with rising shame. He could not understand how such things kept appearing near him. "I swear I did not take them," he repeated, his voice stronger now. The coins were returned to the treasurer, but the damage was not as easy to remove. Soon after, another event occurred. During a visit to the market square with Princess Akwoma and Prince Echezona, Prince Idike walked through the stalls greeting traders kindly. The villagers bowed respectfully as always, though some eyes now carried quiet doubt. As they prepared to leave the market, a wealthy trader cried out loudly, "My jewels!" the man shouted. "They are gone!" The market became noisy. People looked around in confusion. The trader insisted he had placed a small pouch of precious stones inside his stall only moments earlier. Guards were called quickly. To the shock of everyone present, the pouch of jewels was found inside the outer pocket of Prince Idike's cloak. Gasps filled the market square. Prince Idike stood frozen. "I did not touch his store," he said firmly, but the pouch had been found on him. The treasurer bowed nervously before the prince. "Your Highness, I do not mean to accuse you personally, but the coins were found among your belongings." Queen Ezine's face burned with humiliation. He removed the pouch carefully and handed it back. "I do not know how this came here," he said quietly. The market crowd whispered more openly now. 3 times. This cannot be coincidence. Can a future king be trusted? The stories spread quickly like dry leaves carried by wind. That evening, Prince Daik sat alone in the palace garden. The sky was turning dark. The air felt heavy. He replayed every movement of the day in his mind. He had not touched the trader's stall. He had not reached into his cloak. He could not understand what was happening. Princess Akwoma approached him quietly. "Brother," she said softly. He looked up at her. His eyes held pain he tried to hide. I am becoming a disgrace, he said quietly. She sat beside him. No, you are being tested. But how? He asked. How do these things appear where I am? She had no answer. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder among servants. Some avoided meeting his eyes, some bowed quickly and walked away. Though no one spoke openly against him before the king, doubt had entered their minds. Prince Echezona felt the tension deeply. He approached his brother later that night. I know you did not do these things, Echezona said firmly. Prince Daik forced a small smile. It does not matter what we know if the people doubt. Echezona clenched his fists. Someone is doing this. Daik nodded slowly. But who? Days passed and the pattern did not stop. A decorated bracelet belonging to a visiting chief disappeared during a small gathering. It was later discovered inside a basket that Prince Daik had briefly carried while assisting servants. Each time, Prince Daik denied the act with calm honesty. Each time, the evidence stood against him. The elders grew increasingly uneasy. In a private council meeting, several spoke carefully. Your Majesty, one elder began, the matter is becoming serious. King Uzo remained silent. Even if the prince is innocent, another elder continued, the people's trust is weakening. Queen Azina rose slightly from her seat. You speak as though guilt has been proven. No, the elder replied quickly, but perception can destroy leadership. King Uzo closed his eyes briefly. He had ruled Eziama for many years. He understood that a king must not only be innocent, but also be trusted without doubt. He loved his son, he believed in him, but the kingdom's stability stood above personal emotion. Outside the palace walls, villagers whispered in small groups. Have you heard? It was found on him again. How can such things keep happening? Some defended him. He is too disciplined to steal. Perhaps it is a trick. But doubt always spread faster than defense. Prince Daik continued attending training, but even the warriors now looked at him differently. Some spoke to him cautiously, others avoided conversation altogether. The humiliation began to weigh heavily on his heart. One afternoon, while practicing sword movements, his grip slipped slightly for the first time in years. His mind was distracted. His trainer paused. Focus, the man said gently. Prince Daik lowered his sword. I am trying. That night, he stood before his father privately. Father, he said respectfully, I do not know how these things happen, but I cannot continue like this. King Uzo studied him carefully. Do you swear you are innocent? The king asked quietly. I swear upon my life. King Uzo believed him. But belief alone was not enough to silence the kingdom. After several days of deep thought, King Uzo called a meeting with his most trusted elders. They discussed long into the night. Some suggested harsher investigation. Some suggested temporary removal from public duties. Finally, the king spoke. Perhaps distance will calm the storm. The elders looked at him carefully. If he stays here while suspicion grows, it may weaken the throne. If he leaves for a time, perhaps the pattern will end. Perhaps reflection will bring clarity. Queen Ezine listened in pain but remained composed. The next morning, King Uzo called Prince Daik into the royal hall. My son, he began gently, this matter has grown beyond what we expected. Prince Daik stood tall, though his heart felt heavy. For the sake of the kingdom, the king continued, I have decided you will travel to your distant cousin's village for a time. Prince Daik's chest tightened. Not as punishment, the king added quickly, but as correction. Time away from the palace may restore peace. Prince Daik understood what his father meant. Though innocent, he was being removed because suspicion had grown too strong. He bowed deeply. I will obey, he said quietly. Inside, pain and humiliation burned within him, but he would not argue. He would not rebel. Queen Ezine held her head high, though tears threatened her eyes. Prince Echezona stepped forward in shock. Father! King Uzo raised his hand gently. This is for the good of the kingdom. Prince Daik turned slowly and walked out of the hall with steady steps, carrying the weight of shame that did not belong to him. And with a heavy heart and troubled mind, King Uzo decided to send him away for correction. The morning Prince Daik left the palace, the sky was grey and quiet. There were no drums, there was no celebration. Only a few guards stood at the gate, watching silently. The order had been given by King Uzo himself. For the sake of peace in the kingdom, Prince Daik would travel to a distant village to stay with a royal cousin for a time. Prince Daik wore simple clothing, not the rich garments of a prince. He carried only what was necessary. He did not protest. He did not argue. He bowed before his father respectfully. "I will return with honor," he said calmly. King Uzo placed a hand on his son's shoulder. His eyes were filled with pain, though his voice remained firm. "Go with dignity. May this distance clear the storm around you." Queen Ezine embraced her son tightly before he left. She whispered softly, "Truth cannot remain hidden forever." Prince Echezona stood beside them, his eyes wet with tears. "I will wait for you," he said quietly. Prince Daik nodded once, then mounted his horse and rode away from the palace. The journey to the distant village took several days. The path was long and dusty. The land slowly changed as he moved farther from Eziama. Hills rose higher. The air grew cooler. The houses in the villages became smaller and simpler. When he finally reached the village of his distant cousin, he was welcomed respectfully. The villagers had already heard rumors about the prince's troubles, but they did not treat him with open disrespect. They were careful and polite. His cousin, a calm and thoughtful man, received him kindly. "You are welcome here," the cousin said. "This village is peaceful. You may rest and reflect." Prince Daik bowed. "I am grateful." Life in the distant village was quieter than in the palace. There were no large gatherings, no royal meetings. The people lived simply. They farmed their land and cared for their animals. Prince Daik joined them in daily work. He helped carry water. He assisted in clearing fields. He trained alone in the early mornings under the open sky. He tried to push the weight of humiliation from his mind. For a few days, everything seemed calm. He began to hope that perhaps distance would truly end the strange events that had followed him in the palace. But the curse had not ended. One afternoon, while helping his cousin repair a fence near a farm, a young farmer cried out. "My knife!" the farmer shouted. "It was here just moments ago." The farmer searched the ground frantically. Others joined in the search. After several minutes, one young boy pointed nervously toward Prince Daik's satchel lying near a tree. The farmer approached slowly and opened the satchel. Inside was the missing knife. Silence fell over the group. Prince Daik's heart stopped for a moment. "I did not take it," he said quickly, stepping forward. The farmer looked confused and frightened. I do not understand." His cousin stepped between them calmly. "This must be a mistake." Prince Daik felt the now familiar shame rising in his chest. The next day, it happened again. A small pouch of coins belonging to a village trader disappeared during market hours. The villagers searched carefully. Once more, the pouch was found near Prince Daik's resting place inside the cousin's compound. The whispers began again. "Even here? Is it possible?" Prince Daik felt as if the ground beneath him had become unstable. He searched his own belongings himself. He watched every movement of his hands. He stayed alert constantly, but the strange events continued. A woman's bracelet disappeared during a village gathering. It was found tucked inside a cloth Prince Daik had borrowed briefly. Each time, he denied the act firmly. Each time, he was believed by some and doubted by others. The cousin watched carefully. One evening, the cousin sat beside Prince Daik near a small fire. "I believe you," the cousin said quietly. Prince Daik looked tired. "Belief does not remove what they see." The cousin nodded slowly. "Something unnatural may be at work." Prince Daik stared into the fire. He had begun to suspect the same. "I do not understand who would do this," he said. The cousin did not answer. He did not know either. Meanwhile, news of the continued theft reached Eziama. Messengers traveled quickly between villages. They carried troubling reports back to King Uzo. When the king heard that valuables were still being found near his son, even in a distant village, his heart sank deeply. He had hoped that distance would clear suspicion. Instead, the pattern had followed him. Queen Ezine listened to the reports quietly, her hands trembling slightly. "This is not normal," she said firmly. "It cannot be coincidence." Prince Echezona felt anger rise within him. "Someone is doing this," he insisted. "Someone must be." But there was no proof, no clear enemy, only repeated accusations. The elders grew more restless. "If the pattern continues even outside the kingdom," one elder said carefully, "then perhaps the prince carries the fault within him." Queen Ezine rose sharply. "You speak without understanding." But even King Uzo could not ignore what he heard. One night, he sat alone in his chamber, staring at the royal staff beside him. His thoughts were heavy. "If he is innocent," he whispered, "why does this follow him everywhere?" His love for his son battled against the weight of evidence. At last, he made a painful decision. A messenger was sent to the distant village with orders. When the messenger arrived and delivered the king's command, Prince Daik felt his chest tighten. "The king requests your immediate return," the messenger said respectfully. Prince Daik nodded slowly. "I will leave at once." The villagers watched him depart with mixed expressions. Some felt sympathy, some felt relief. His cousin walked with him to the edge of the village. "Do not lose strength," the cousin said quietly. Prince Daik forced a small smile. "Strength is all I have left." The journey back to Eziama felt longer than before. His heart felt heavier with each step. When he arrived at the palace gates, the guards bowed, but their eyes showed uncertainty. Inside the palace, the atmosphere felt tense. King Uzo received him in the royal hall. The king's face was calm, but deeply troubled. "Even there," the king asked softly, "even there," silence filled the hall. "I swear again," Daik said firmly, "I did not take anything." The king believed his son's words, but the kingdom demanded action. "For now," King Uzo said slowly, "you must remain within the palace. You will not attend public gatherings." Prince Daik understood what that meant. Guards escorted him to a large chamber within the palace. It was not a prison cell, but it was guarded carefully. The doors were heavy. The windows were narrow. As he stepped inside, he turned once more toward his father. "I will endure," he said quietly. The door closed behind him with a heavy sound, and with his heart burdened and his honor questioned, Prince Daik was locked inside a palace chamber.